Ukraine warned of Russian drones approaching and attacking several parts of the country. In the central Dnipropetrovsk region, the authorities reported fires at infrastructure facilities, private homes and businesses. A number of homes in the northeastern city of Kharkiv were also hit. In the capital, Kyiv, the mayor said air defenses were in operation and urged people to stay in shelters.
Вони погодяться, но вони не зроблять.
The Russians will agree, but they won't do it. It's 100%. I think it's 100% certain. There is no other way. That is, they will somehow say in public arenas that there are no hostilities, no shelling. But as this abomination has been crawling, so it will continue to crawl. The Russians will agree, but they won't do it. It's 100%. I think it's 100% certain. There is no other way. That is, they will somehow say in public arenas that there are no hostilities, no shelling. But as this abomination has been crawling, so it will continue to crawl. The guys are almost all patriotically driven to win. The Russians need to be pushed down, broken on the battlefield in any case, to have some kind of advantage. Looking at the situation, they are almost exhausted, almost. As much as it would be beneficial for them, note, a ceasefire, they will attack, they will assault.
I am more than sure that it will be like before, during the anti-terrorist operation. Quietly and peacefully launching FPVs, and destroying what they don't like, because the OSCE has no influence on them, but it does influence us. To clarify, will the Russians agree to a ceasefire? Why not? Yes, it is beneficial for them. Well, 30 days is very good for the enemy. You can bring tanks to the front line without anybody shooting at them, nothing like that. On our side, it's bad because they are unlikely to let us bring tanks to the front line. If a large gray zone is created and volunteer armies from different countries are sent there, then yes, it will be a guarantee of security. But without this, in fact, everything remains as it was. The same freeze as during the anti-terrorist operation, and everything will continue again.
Well, I think that Russia is unlikely to be stopped by the ceasefire agreement, but the Americans are not simple either, speaking about Trump. So, I think that there is hope that this will cause a reaction that will not be in favor of Russia. I think this Trump is the kind of person who wants everything to go according to his plan.
Тобто це така людина, яка, як я вважаю.
Well, for more on this, we're joined on the line from London by the international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Good to see you, Dr. Laskiewicz. So the ceasefire, no ceasefire yet, but one perhaps on the horizon, though in the last few hours there have been reports of numerous Russian attacks on various locations in Ukraine. What are your thoughts on all that?
First and foremost, until it happens, there is no ceasefire. It's very important. Secondly, Russia does not have to agree to anything. Please remember, Russia has been asked to agree to all sorts of things, and they don't see any reason for doing so. After all, they want a multipolar world and not one where America dictates. Secondly, they are also very cautious, and in point of fact, the ceasefire in Russian eyes is seen completely differently, a point which perhaps has not been brought out. Namely, that they see it as a way of America supplying aid again to Ukraine and intelligence with the ceasefire as a sort of cover, and not as has been presented around the world as it being a ceasefire with the Americans finally getting on board and helping Ukraine again. Thirdly, and this is the most important point, although it was indicated by the Russians themselves, they are winning. Right now, they are on the verge of retaking Kursk. They were smart enough to realize that when the Americans said they would not be supplying intelligence, please note, strictly speaking, about what the Russians are doing in Russia, that's the exact thing that they blocked. Instead of fighting more on the Eastern Front, what they did do was made every attempt to recover Kursk. And if they do, it will be a double whammy for the Ukrainians and put the notion of a peace treaty remotely favorable to Ukrainian interest very much in the shade. And so for all these reasons, the ceasefire is simply a talking point at present. And incidentally, as you pointed out, the rockets striking Ukraine show that Russia is still very much alive and kicking and certainly not interested in any immediate ceasefire, which is what the Americans say they were looking for.
But I mean, do we now, because it's all a bit sort of murky and confusing, do we now seemingly have an America that is in Ukraine's corner, but may well be in Russia's corner as well?
Yes, it is confusing. The point about it is that America is in no one's corner as such, strictly speaking. It is American first. And on top of that, it doesn't like Trump himself, doesn't like wars. So therefore, to the extent that they can put the war out on whatever terms, that is their goal. After all, they already are seeking their minerals deal. They want to do business. They don't like wars. So America is not on Ukraine's side in the same way that the Europeans are. It is simply that it's prepared to support Ukraine to some degree, to get peace terms which to some degree will not lose Ukraine entirely. And that is it. They remain also still on speaking terms with Russia. More than that, they're improving their diplomatic relations. And so from this point of view, America certainly cannot be said to be on Ukraine's side.
Nevertheless, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying the ball was now in Russia's court and that before you can negotiate, you have to stop shooting at each other. Is that a message that Mr. Putin is likely to hearken to?
Not really. It's a pious hope, is it not? The point about it is that ceasefires usually are negotiated and not simply a diktat. In this case from Washington, that's what he wants. And the fact that he's brought President Zelensky to heel and told the Europeans where they get off does not mean that Russia is amenable to any of this sort of pressure. Far from it. Russia has shown that she is prepared to further her interests and is very cautious. Moreover, to some degree, what the Russians are doing, apart from them being cautious, is playing for time. Because if they can recover the entire Kursk enclave, if you like, or because that's what it is now, more or less, because the Russians are virtually in the process of cutting off the Ukrainian army, what's left of it there. If they can recover this, in order to do so, play for time by means of studying negotiations, meeting, cross-meeting, renegotiating, then they will have scored a huge military success. And that therefore, from this point of view, Rubio's point is in effect simply being de facto ignored until Russia feels it's good for them to do so, which is not quite the spirit, of course, that Rubio wanted. He wants to see peace breaking out, and that is not actually what the Russians are saying.
Yeah, well, as you correctly pointed out, in a manner, I mean, I'll put it another way, but the US is essentially helping to open the door. But a deal for a lasting peace is going to involve some tough negotiations, even if Russia goes along with the ceasefire. Ukraine in no doubt that it should be poised to make some tough decisions. And as Marco Rubio said, Ukraine should be prepared to do some difficult things.
Yes. The pressure is on Ukraine all the time to essentially cede territory, not want to be a member of NATO. The EU itself is not a mention here, must have no European troops. And the Russians are sticking to their guns. They've made no sign whatsoever of any concessions. Not one. On the contrary, they want all the territory, which they say is now part of Russia. Please note, this is now technically Crimea, as far as the Russians are concerned, is a part of Russia. They want all this and a bit more because they haven't quite got hold of all the territory which they assert is theirs. Now, in this case, there is no easy negotiations. The Russians are in a strong position, and it's very hard to see what Ukraine can do under American, if you like, pressure, except agree to formally, diplomatically admit that a part of its former territory is no longer Ukrainian. And this is the very thing that President Zelensky refuses to do. Absolutely categorically. So what negotiations can take place is hard to see. Moreover, please remember that the ceasefire is of more use actually to Russia in one sense. It enabled them to bring up even more forces, as one of your interlocutors pointed out. And therefore, from that point of view, it's very dubious whether the ceasefire is in fact a route, straightaway route to a peace process. Rather, the peace process has got to finally come to what terms, as in fact the Americans have put it, what terms the Ukrainians are prepared to settle for and the Russians are prepared to settle for. And at present, they're diametrically opposite to each other.
On that note, I want to thank you very much indeed. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the International Affairs Analyst. He was talking to me on the line from London.